I love a good story. Stories can strengthen our faith, they can remind us of truths we may have forgotten, give us new perspectives, and motivate us to action. Stories can bring hope and courage, especially when these stories are about real events and real people. One of my favorite stories in the Old Testament is the story of Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea. I'm going to read just a portion of the story starting in Exodus chapter 14, 10 through 14, and I'm reading from the NIV 84. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." What an incredible story, right? Did you catch what God said in verse 14? The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. I don't know about you, but it's really hard for me to be still sometimes. As I shared before, my mind tends to wander constantly. And in Psalm 46:10, we are reminded to be still. God reminds us to be still and know that I am God. But try to picture yourself in their situation. I mean, I can't even imagine. There is a charging Egyptian army behind them, ready to attack, and in front of them is this massive Red Sea, right? This ocean. And their leader Moses tells them to not be afraid and to wait and see the deliverance of the Lord. Now, if I were there, I would probably ask Moses exactly how long does he want me to wait. And I would tell him and remind him that there is an angry army behind us. And I would probably tell him that I don't know how to swim. So it's kind of a really, really difficult situation that they were in and that I would find myself in if I were in that situation. But the beauty of this story is that we see God deliver, protect, and save them as only He can. He delivered them out of this impossible situation by parting the Red Sea for the Israelites, and we see God display His glory and His faithfulness. Women of faith, I'd like to encourage you to spend some time this week, maybe going back and reading a favorite story you may have not read in a long time, or maybe one you haven't read at all and you've always wanted to read up on a story that you probably have heard at church or in Sunday school. Take note of the impossible circumstances, the chaos, the fearful situations, but more importantly, take note of God's control, His glory, His faithfulness. Be amazed at how He can take something chaotic and impossible and turn it into something beautiful, something good, something that makes you just sit back and say, "Whoa, that was pretty amazing, God," or "You are amazing, God." See that when God is involved, anything can happen. When God is involved, a smaller and weaker guy is given courage and strength to beat a scary giant. When God is involved, a young man sold into slavery by his own jealous brothers can later forgive his brothers and in the end say, "What you meant for evil, God meant it for good." When God is involved, an army that starts off with 32,000 soldiers only to be reduced to an army of 300, though grossly outnumbered, can still defeat the powerful Midianites. No matter what giant obstacles you may be facing, what injustice may have been done, how defeated you feel facing a task or an army so large, would you find courage in knowing that the same God that parted the Red Sea for Moses and the Israelites, that gave the victory to David against Goliath, the same God that provided for Joseph even through the injustice done to him, And the same God that fought the battle for Gideon and his shrinking army of 300 is the same God who loves you, sees you, knows your heart, and he cares for you. Would you invite him and involve him in your challenges today? I pray that these stories would give you fresh courage and renewed hope during these crazy times. We are reminded when we read these stories that we're not the only ones that experience some really hard times. May we be reminded when we read these stories that God is in control, that he is faithful, that it's his power working in us and not our own strength and might, and that he can work all things out for our good and for his glory. Would you take time this week to enjoy and be encouraged by a story of faith from God's Word? Comment below and share which story you read and what truths the Lord reminded you of through that story. I'm really excited to see what story you will be reading this week. These stories were not written simply to entertain us, but they were recorded to remind us that we can trust him. He never fails. God knows what's behind us and what's in front of us. These stories remind us that we can take heart because when God is involved, anything can happen. Chuck Swindoll states, "The one who split the Red Sea down the middle and leveled the wall around Jericho and brought his son back from the dead takes delight in the incredible." So ladies, as it states in Exodus 14:13 and 14, do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still and trust that he is a faithful God.